Hello. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it a minute or two before we dive into chatting with Alexine, Zoe, and Anthony. Let's get started by put your location in the chat.
Can I just yell my location? Actually, I don't want to disclose my location. I take it back.
Give us the
I'm in Canada.
Chi-town.
If we want to make it real serious, 57 no.
Contiguous US.
Well,
is that how you say that? How do you say that word? Is it contiguous? Continuous?
Which word?
Like basically the US minus Alaska and Hawaii. What is that word? It's like
continent?
No. There's like a term for like the part of the US that is like one unit.
Oh, so everything but Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, basically.
Yeah, and like the territories. It's like the block of the US. It's like contiguous.
We can only go up from here, I think.
It can only go up. Here we go. We've got someone's excited to hear from Zoe. That's exciting.
I don't know that you should be that excited, but thank you.
No, everyone loves hearing from Zoe. I would love to start with introductions. Anthony, can we start with you, my friend? Like, welcome. Like, why are you here today? And like, why is mental health important to you? Like, yeah, we'll start with that.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Anthony Natoli. I have the privilege of leading the BDR team at QA Wolf. Mental health is near and dear to my heart because of a variety of reasons. But essentially, I've been through a lot of things in my 20s that have yielded a lot of perspective that have made me realize how important prioritizing mental health and embracing it every single day are. And so, Daniel, when you reached out about the opportunity to come on, it was a no-brainer. So very excited to be sharing the space with everyone and, helping where I can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anthony. Alexine, can we get you next?
Yes. So my name is Alexine Mudawar. I am CEO of an organization called Women in Sales. And I spent the last 10 years prior to that in enterprise sales. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart for a couple of reasons. I think there's, on the personal side, just my own journey of navigating burnout and anxiety and anxiousness. This is a field that brings in a lot of those things. And then on the other side now, leading a community with a community audience of close to 12,000 people, being so close to other folks who are struggling with their mental health and their burnout and learning how to navigate those conversations as well. So it's kind of, I have proximity on two sides now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And last and certainly not least, Zoe.
Hi, my name is Zoe Hartsfield. I am a mediocre marketer and I get to serve the sales and marketing team over at Swanside. Super excited to be sharing this space with Daniel, Anthony, and Alexine, people I love and respect. And also this is just like a topic very near and dear to my heart as somebody who has spent a lot of their life mentally unwell and neglecting their mental health, and kind of going through a journey over the last couple of years, recognizing that mental health is health. And when you can prioritize that, a lot of other things in life fall into place. So really excited to kind of like open up this conversation. I think there's sometimes a stigma around it. And I think especially in SaaS sales, like it's a really, really important topic. I don't know too many other industries and specific roles within industries that are quite as stressful. I mean, like obviously they exist. Like I'm not saying we're doing brain surgery over here, but it is a very, very stressful job. And so I do think that this is going to be a really valuable conversation. I'm excited for it.
Amazing. And I guess finally myself, maybe you weren't the last, I was. Hey everyone, I'm Daniel. I get to host this wonderful conversation between these three fantastic folk. And I'm in sales. I'm an account executive at Aligned. And I'm a little newer in the mental health space, so to speak. I would always have said, I was probably that classic salesperson that was like, yeah, I'll be fine. Everything's okay. And recently I have not been okay. And it was one of the reasons why I've been reaching out to these guys and getting help. And we thought like, this would be a great thing for more than just me. So I'm in the seat with you guys. Any follow-up questions that I'm asking, it's probably for me. If you guys have anything, throw it in the chat and I'll also, pull it up and we can ask these wonderful people. their 2 cents. We do want to add that we are none of us health professionals. This is all our like personal experiences of, things that have happened to us, how we have dealt with them, whatnot. So please, that's like we wanted that to be first and foremost in everyone's minds. But would love to start with a question actually from all of you wonderful people. Put this in the chat if you have ever experienced mental health challenges, specifically in your sales career. 1 for yes, 2 for no. We'd love to see what everyone's going through right now. If you're willing to, obviously, if you don't want to put it out there, by all means, feel free to, just forget about it. But as far as, I'd love to dive into, Zoe, you talked about the stigma. And Alexine, I know that's something that is also very, first and foremost, that you think is something that in sales needs to change and is changing. Could you dive into a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I was just looking at some data points before this event. Actually, I'm very data driven. And I was reading this recent statistic that 64% of respondents said that working in sales has affected their mental health. I think we can derive from that probably that means in the negative, probably not necessarily positively. And there's a lot of data that also recognizes and acknowledges that this is a really challenging field and that many folks that are working in sales are experiencing mental health challenges. The part about it still being a taboo topic, it's so interesting to me because if you think about any other data point that tells us, 2/3 or 3/4 of some kind of demographic or audience feels XYZ way, you would think that then that topic wouldn't be taboo. It's something that we're almost all experiencing. It's universal. But the reality is that some of the historic kind of sales of yesterday, that the rep, the one that was lauded and seen as the top rep was strong, was independent, was fierce, was ruthless, didn't have emotions, could just cut through stuff. And I think what we're seeing now and what I'm really excited about is we're starting to see this new evolution of the seller, of folks who are really true to themselves, that do have emotions, that are customer centric, that have personalities. We're not as cutthroat. This is becoming a really respectable role and career path. And I think thanks to people on this webinar and thanks to so many others in our field. So this idea of this still being taboo, unfortunately, is still prevalent in our space. But it's something that I believe if we keep having these conversations, if we keep talking about this on LinkedIn, if we keep talking about it within our own communities, then we can start to move past that and start to talk about how we're actually going to impact this for the better. How can we recognize that 3/4 or 2/3 of us are struggling with this? And then how can we share those best practices? But yeah, it's definitely something that has historically been one of those topics that you just didn't talk about. People didn't talk about therapy. I remember I started in enterprise sales, like I said, 10 years ago. And one of my colleagues was in therapy. And I remember that was horrifying to everyone on the sales team. There's something really wrong with her. And then what's funny is I look at this year, for example, and everybody that's in my immediate circle, the most successful of all of my friends are 100%, every single one of them is in therapy. And so it's just such an interesting juxtaposition against what I initially came into sales thinking and seeing to where we are today. So hopefully that sets the stage a little bit, but yeah.
Oh, I love it. I would love to ask this to all three of you, actually. Why do we think mental health is important and should be a priority in the sales industry? I will point to you, Anthony, first.
Yeah, I have a very simple answer. It's because life is hard. It really is. I always, before I started to have this perspective on why it was important to embrace life being hard, I always tried to muscle my way through and make life easier instead of accepting that things are just going to be naturally hard and that's okay. And that there's resources out there to help you, not only your family, your friends, therapy, for guidance on prioritizing your mental health. When I hit rock bottom, I only got out because I put my shovel down and I had people pulling me out, and it wasn't just me climbing. So for me, I think it's so important because life is really hard, and you know, realizing that you don't have to be on this journey alone, and it's really okay to accept that things are going to be hard, especially in your career. And it's really easy to let things that are happening in your personal life pour over into your professional life, and when those two things collide, you know, you're left thinking whatever thoughts that you may have, and a lot of times are negative, and it can be really hard to know what to do with those thoughts. And that's where I think a lot of people tend to struggle, is when those negative thoughts or emotions start to pop up. It's really hard to know what to do with them and how to address them. And so that's why I think it's such an important, you know, topic.
Yeah. And I guess I'd love to ask a follow-up question is like, what do you think the impact of mental health has had on like your sales performance and productivity throughout your career?
I mean, really quick, I just want to highlight Casey's comment. I think it's so good, and this is actually a great point. Like, to your question, Daniel, is if you aren't maintaining your mental health, things start to deteriorate, and the cost of that gets greater and greater, and the risk gets greater and greater. You know, it's one thing to have one bad sales call because you're like a little underslept. It's another thing to have a full-blown mental breakdown and get fired from your job. Like, and if you're not staying on top of things, if you're not looking out for yourself and, you know, maintaining your mental health, because your mental health is your health, like, this is sort of an extreme and yet something very, very real in my life. Like, you can't have a job if you're dead, or if you're in jail, or if you are in the hospital or in rehab, or like all of these different things. Like, those are the extremes. And yet that is the result if you neglect certain things for too long, or it could be. And so people like to say like, oh, I'll get to therapy later. I'll get to my mental health later. I'll put it off. I don't need it right now. It's not that bad. But when it is that bad, it could be too late. And so, like, you could risk it all, or you could stay on top of those things. And like, I don't know about you guys, but I show up as like a better version of myself at work when I feel like I have a space outside of work to work through my stuff. I feel like I'm a more present teammate and partner and friend and all of those things. And I think I can be more present with clients and prospects and more on top of, like, I'm more capable of learning if I'm not surviving. And I feel like I can continuously level up and get better at my job if I'm not just like on the fringes of a breakdown at all times. And so I think like it just creates space in your life to get better and to level up and continue to work on yourself when you're working on that like more personal mental health side of yourself. Because in today's day and age, in a lot of remote work environments, in this sort of virtual world, whether you work in an office or not, your clients, you're going to be meeting with them over Zoom. Very few people are doing 100% of their business in person. And that has created this like bleed between the personal and the professional. And so there's no more like, I can just turn it off at 5 o'clock and go like live my life. Like, work Zoe is regular Zoe and vice versa. And therefore, if you're not taking care of it 365, 24/7, like, it's gonna come through in your work eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you for jumping in there. As far as like, would love to dive into the some tactical stuff. Like, we've talked about things of like, you know, this is important. We understand that this is something that we shouldn't let go, you know, to call on Casey's comment again. You know, we don't want to replace the engine. We want to change the oil, you know, all the time. Like, how can people change the oil, so to speak, in their mental health? Like, what are some things that they can do, first and foremost?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones, and this took me a really, really long time, is like learning to read yourself. And I think that sounds so obvious. Like, we know ourselves better than anyone else, but once you start to like really key into like, what are the signals that I'm starting to inch towards burnout? Like, what are those key giveaways? For me, the irony is the more tired I get, the less I sleep. And so when I see that I'm like, hey, now it's been like 2 or 3 days in a row, I'm rolling on like 4 to 6 hours of sleep max. I'm not good. Like, I'll take a day, and I'm like, I'm going to have to take a day and just step away and regroup, recenter. Maybe I sleep for a whole day if I need to, like whatever that is. But I think like learning and understanding what your cues are, whether that's like, you stop eating or you stop sleeping, or you're feeling like anxious, or you're noticing you like mess with your nails more or something. Like there's just all these little cues, and they're all different for each of us. So I think it's really important to kind of like know first and foremost what those are. And then I agree fully with what's been shared here. Treating therapy, it's all, for so long it was seen as this thing that you go to as this last resort. Like, hey, I'm going to go to therapy when I'm at like crisis point, and that's the right time to go. And the reality is, the people that I know that are consistently going to therapy, they're doing that in a format so that they're basically approaching it as, either biweekly or monthly or whatever checkpoint. And it's a space and a place where they can talk about issues that they want to work through. And I think there's also this misconception sometimes too, that it's like, you have to go in and be like crying and hysterical, and it has to be like, sometimes it's just a conversation. Like sometimes there isn't a big thing that you have to work through. Sometimes there is a big thing you have to work through. So there's nuances to all of this. And then, for me personally, I think one of the most recent examples I did, once I went full time in my CEO role, I found it very, very challenging to work from home and live at home. And my husband's working from home as well. I felt like I had absolutely no separation between what my life was on the side and what my work life was. Like I would literally just have my laptop and like scooch it over at the end of the day, like 3 inches. And that was like home time. And so I literally, and I understand this comes with some level of privilege as well, but I rented a space, like an office space. And I was like, I want to conduct my work in this office space, and I want to have my home life be my home life. So now like I leave my computer here. I've never done that in my life, where I just like leave my computer, I finish my work day and I go home. And so I think like also just reestablishing some boundaries, and it doesn't have to be to that extreme. You don't have to like rent a workspace. But I think figuring out like what those boundaries are, and maybe it's that you leave your computer in a different room. Maybe you zip it into your backpack and put it off to the side. But those are just a couple of things that are very present and top of mind for me.
Yeah, thank you.
That's like I really like what you mentioned there in terms of like keeping track. Like it makes me think of, you can't manage what you don't measure. And a lot of people don't think of mental health as something you can measure because it's like kind of nebulous, but there are absolutely trends that you can pay attention to. So if we're talking about like the tactical, I don't like to speak in shoulds as much as I can avoid it. So I'll just say some things that have like worked for me. Like I wear like a wearable, and I have a Whoop, I have a Fitbit, I have an Apple Watch, whatever it is. And it tracks things like sleep and stress and strength, like all of those things. And I can actually like visually see over time when I'm like not getting enough sleep that my stress goes up. And like when I start to kind of feel off, I might look at that data and be like, oh, wow, like I've really been, like to your point, Alexine, like neglecting sleep for like many, many days in a row. I need to prioritize that. So I think measuring things like that, but there's other things you can do too. Like I journal, which some people like to do, some people don't like to do. Amy Volas has like a great like journaling tactic that I actually adopted like 2 years ago. And it's been really helpful to look back, and you can almost see trends in your words too, like the way that we speak about ourselves, the way that we talk about our day, our work, how we're feeling, etc. Whereas like if I didn't track anything, I might just wake up one day and be like, oh my God, I'm in a crisis, versus being able to kind of see the trends going down. And then like the other thing, just kind of going back to therapy, I had somebody actually message me this morning, and I wanted to save it for when we were on this call. They were like, how do I like even find a therapist? And one of the easiest ways that I've been able to do it, now I will say this is something in the US, I'm not certain if it is in other countries, but I would imagine there's an equivalent, is I go onto Psychology Today, and you can type in your location, you can type in your insurance, you can type in like a specific issue or specialty. So if I'm needing help with depression, or if I was needing help with like marriage counseling, like you can kind of like pick a discipline, and it'll spit out hundreds of therapists in your area and whether or not they're taking clients or on a wait list. And you can literally just email them. Like I wrote a little blurb the last time I looked for a therapist. It was like, I copy and pasted it to, I don't know, 10 or 15 different therapists, be like, this is what I'm going through. Is this something you feel like you can help me with? And are you taking new clients right now? And 5 of them got back to me. And a lot of these therapists will let you do like a 10-minute screening call to kind of like get a vibe for them. And it's usually free, where you can just like actually talk to them and see if it's going to be a good fit. So that was like the way that I found my last 2 therapists over the past like 5 years. If you're like, I don't really know where to start, that would be a place to start.
Absolutely. And I would love to call out Jeff's comment here. This is actually something that I do personally. I am like every Sunday, my iPhone tells me what my average screen time was for the week. And when I'm under like 2.5 hours, I feel like I've done really well.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say just real quick, Jeff is also, for those who aren't familiar, Jeff is one of probably the key people in the sales space that regularly talks about mental health and shares best practices, shares tips and strategies. So I just want to call out Jeff, because when I think about mental health and sales and how we can make an impact, and where Jeff is one of the first names that comes to mind. So it's no surprise that every comment he's dropping is going to be complete fire. So anyways, keep it rolling, Daniel. I just want to say.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, you want to take my spot? I can dip. I'll just listen. This is great. Yeah, exactly. Anthony, I know that this is something that's like really important to you. Can you give us like some of your tactical ways that you like to, like take care of yourself?
Yeah, for sure. As Zoe said, I'm not a fan of like telling people what they should do, because I think we live in a world where there's so many like tips and tricks that are like glorified as like silver bullets, like take a cold ice bath at 5 a.m. and, sprint up a mountain before you start working. And it's what's interesting to me is I think I tried a bunch of different things and then I found what worked for me. So, I think the reason, just to look at it in the bigger picture, the reason why you should have, a morning routine or things that you do before bed is because, problems never go away, right? Like I made it through like some harsh adversity, but I still have problems today. The other week I messaged Zoe like that I needed some help, and she was able to point me in the right direction. So like problems never really go away. It's just your relationship with them and your ability to deal with them changes. So the reason I have those things in place, which I'll talk about in a second, is because I still deal with a ton of stuff that I need to address, and no one ever has it really figured out. So the things that I do in the morning, when I first wake up, and I wake up around 6 because I like to go to the gym before work, but you don't have to do that. But I do it. I wake up. I don't look at my phone. I'm lucky to have a balcony in my apartment, and now that's not freezing in New York. I just sit outside with a little cup of tea. I look at the sun. I take some deep breaths. I think about my family. I think about gratitude, because for me, I made it through addiction. And a big part of getting through addiction is thinking about life when you were in it. And so I always think back about everything that I have today is because I'm not, partaking in my addiction. And I just have so much to be grateful for. Even little things, like I'll just jot down, like, I'm really grateful I got a good night's sleep, or that I'm able to like move my body, or that I'm able to have access to like fresh, cold water. And I had a mentor tell me that it's impossible to be in a state of resentment when you're in a state of gratitude. Like you can't feel those things at the same exact time. So I always like to start the day with gratitude, looking at the sun, some kind of stretching, moving my body. I text my mom every morning. Just seeing a text back from her lights me up. And then after I get back from the gym, I'll, just start my day. And then I'm a big fan of like completely decompressing, watching TV at night, like hanging out, petting my dog, like nothing crazy, but just making time for me. I drink like a gallon of water a day. I try to eat really healthy because, I found that when I'm not eating well, it affects, my body and my mental capacity to have like a certain amount of energy. But again, this has been almost 4-year journey for me since I've been prioritizing my mental health and my well-being. And so my message to everyone is do things until you find what works for you, and find the things that give you energy and inner peace and joy, and that you can sustain. Like I tried the cold shower thing. Like I hate it. So like, why would I, I'm sure it has benefits for certain people, but for me, I'm not a fan of it. So I don't do it. The other thing I'll say is I've been going to therapy for 4 years. I actually have 2 therapists. One that I've been talking to for the last 4 years, one that I recently just got. And yeah, those are just a few things that I do that have really worked for me. And the one last thing I'll leave everyone with is that on this topic specifically, is that when I feel emotions or negative thoughts, I don't like push them down. I talk to people about them. I really try to sit with them and figure out where they're coming from. And I have no problem asking for help. Like, I have realized that I've surrendered to the idea of having to be on this journey alone. And I don't need to do that. And for me, that's been my like biggest superpower, is the ability to like have the awareness to ask for help and let go of trying to solve everything on my own.
Wow, I feel like that's a webinar in of itself. Thank you so much, Anthony. Me and Alexine and Zoe were just nodding the whole way through. Casey left a comment while you were chatting, and I think this is fantastic. I popped it up briefly, but Danny, do you guys have anything about this that you want to chime in on?
I do. Okay, so this is something really near and dear to my heart, because I've talked to people, and I feel for you. Like, not everybody has just a ton of, cash in the bank to drop on a lot of different things. And there's a lot of ways you can look at it. Like, you can talk to your company about like maybe if there's benefits. Usually therapists, they exist. Like I said, you can search for ones that take your insurance to kind of augment the cost. But even still, I'll talk to somebody who's like, I don't know, just like $100 a week on therapy. Like, I can't really afford it. And I just wanted to share a couple of numbers with you, because a DUI in the state of Colorado is a $14,000 fine. And a 5150 hold, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that would be like a suicide watch or somebody who is at risk of hurting themselves or others. Like, I've been on one of those before, not even that long ago. And that was a $22,000 bill. So if you think you can't afford $100 a week, or maybe if you got insurance, $50 a week, $40 a week, $30 a week, just know that like, if you get to that point, it's a lot more expensive of a problem. Also, funeral expenses, really, really spendy. And like, not that we want to get that dark, but that's a reality for people, is they'll say, I can't afford it. Really, you can't afford not to do it. If you need it, if you're in need of support, if you need to talk to somebody, like, obviously, like Ant said, like, talk to your friends, like talk to the people in your community. Community is so, so important. But some people, like, you need to talk to a professional, and that's okay. Like, we aren't mental health professionals. I can always be a listening ear to a friend. If Alexine hit me up and was like, hey, I'm having a bad day, will I listen? Absolutely. But there are some things that are just like gonna be way more helpful to have an objective third-party outsider who is licensed and educated help you through certain things. And like, it's saved my life on more than one occasion, and saved a lot of people that I know. And like, also, you just don't have to struggle through stuff alone. So if you're thinking about it as like a math equation, just know it gets a lot more expensive if you neglect it than if you take care of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Zoe. Anthony, I have a follow-up question for you. As someone who's more new in this, concentrating on mental health, you said you have 2 therapists. Like, can you explain like why one would need 2 therapists? Like, is there a particular, like, did you get in a fight with the previous one? Is there like, because they specialize in other things? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's the latter. So one therapist that I was working with, he got me through a certain set of problems, and I was talking to him about something I've been dealing with recently, and he basically did the right thing, like we all should as sales professionals, and said, hey, I'm not the best person to help you with this. Here are some other, resources, and recommended I seek out help elsewhere for like a specific problem that I'm having. So that was the reason why. And I'm talking to someone who specializes in the topic of help that I'm looking to get.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Guys, would love to ask you, as far as, this is all about like mental health and sales. So we'd love to sort of pivot back to like that. What would you say is like some of the, let's start with like impacts of not taking care of your mental health as far as performance and productivity? Like, could you maybe talk about like how it's affected each of you? And then, yeah, we'll start there. Alexine, damn it. I haven't heard you talk in a while.
We're good friends. It's like you don't know me. No, I think yeah, I mean, so I think first and foremost for this topic, like the one thing we have to acknowledge and recognize is that sales is a really stressful career. Like what career out there exists where you have a quota? Many of us have a monthly, quarterly, and annual quotas. So not only do you have like, even if you hit your one, you're thinking about the next one. If you hit the next one, you're thinking about the other one. And then even if you hit the third one, you're thinking about 2024 already. And so this is just such a stressful career, and it's a very visible career as well. Like every email, for the most part, we all have like a nice tech stack. So all our emails are logged, our calls are recorded. Like it's a very, I don't know what to call that. Like it's a very like voyeuristic role. I don't know what to call that. So I think that's important to acknowledge that just sales as a whole is set up in such a way that it is really hard to protect your mental health, and it's hard to kind of like maintain these things as well. So I just think that's a good starting point for kind of this question.
I think like to that end, yes, like the number looming over your head, like the performative nature of the job, also like your pay is tied to that performance too. So there's like the extra weight of like, maybe you have a family, maybe you have bills, like there's just a lot of pressure when your comp is tied to your performance like that. And then there's a lot of stuff outside of your control in sales, you know, the macroeconomic climate, something like that. But when I think about like my time as a salesperson, I'm in marketing now, but I'm pretty closely tied to sales at my current organization. When I was an SDR and I was having a really, really bad bout of like anxiety and mental health, it came up in my calls. I was so anxious to be on the phone, and you could just hear it in my call. Like I was so nervous. I tell this story a lot, and I've never really given this context, but I was actually going through like a really, really bad bout of mental health. And one of my very first cold calls, like first couple of weeks on the phone, moving from inbound to outbound, my call went, "Hi, is this Zoe?" And the prospect was like, "No." And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm Zoe. This is a cold call. I'm so sorry." And then like just dead air. And then I was like, I'm just going to hang up on myself now. And I hung up the phone, and I didn't do the rest of my calls for the rest of the day because I was just so anxious. I was a ball of stress, and that comes through. And then you like don't do super great, like talking to prospects, and people can feel that. People can feel your stress through the phone. They can feel it when you're on Zoom, even though we're like not in the same room. It can be palpable. And so the thing for me is by not taking care of it, it was affecting my actual like job performance. And even though I was doing the activities, I wasn't doing them well. And it took kind of taking a step back, getting calmer, working on my mental health, creating space to actually be able to show up and like make cold calls and not be a nervous wreck every time somebody picked up the phone. So that's like just a practical kind of silly anecdote. But from a job performance perspective, I think prospects can feel it. And we're in a relational role. Like you got to be able to have conversations. You got to be able to like win trust. People aren't going to trust a sweaty, nervous, like mess who's like, I can't remember. I'm sorry. Like stuttering, like, do you know what you're doing? And maybe you do, but you're just nervous. That comes through. So by taking care of your mental health and having more of like a calm, centered presence, you're going to establish more trust. You're going to win more conversations. And avoid, you know, calling your prospects by your own name and then hanging up on them for yourself.
That's always good. Anthony, I know that you really talk about how like people can feel your energy, and like would love to hear your 2 cents on this.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so easy to attach your self-worth to your number and the outcome in sales. And as a result, right, like imagine your self-worth is tied to you hitting your quota or winning a deal. Naturally, you're going to lose some deals. If you don't hit your number and all your self-worth is tied to this idea of hitting your quota, then naturally you're going to feel like you're not good enough, or, you know, I must not be cut out for this. Right. So, and also like when you lose a deal and all your self-worth is tied up in your quota, you now become super needy and anxious to the next prospect because you're like pushing your agenda on them because you really need this thing to make you feel whole and whatnot. But at the same time, I do want to caveat that I do get people have bills to pay, and it's super important. A lot of people get into sales for the money. But for me, what I found was early on in my career, I couldn't really figure out why I wasn't winning deals. And I realized that I was coming off like super selfishly in my deals because all I cared about was Anthony's quota, Anthony's commission check, and that energy fed off of my prospects where my questions that I was asking, the way that I was interacting with champions and trying to move deals forward was all in the best interest of me. And that was because it all stemmed from me needing this outcome to make me feel whole. But what happened is after I went through what I went through, I realized like, hey, maybe I'm like have this backwards. Maybe I should be letting my self-worth naturally that I know I have without these deals ground me first and start to focus my energy and attention on the things that I actually can control and let go of the things that I can't. Like I can't control if I'm going to win a deal, but what I can control is showing up as myself, right? And earning trust from my buyers and having their best interest at heart. And, again, controlling what I actually can and letting go of what I can't and realizing that, hey, regardless if I win this deal or not, like I'm still Anthony. I still have my health. Like I still have all these things. I don't need this deal to make me feel whole. And so making that switch really, really helped me. But I will say it takes work. It's that inner work practice that you have to do to realize that, hey, regardless if you get that big commission check or not, it doesn't make you better or worse of a person, right? Like I know plenty of people with a lot of money that are miserable, So it's like trying your best to make that switch. And that's where, all the tactics we talked about and prioritizing your mental health can give you that perspective to realize it's okay to let go. And the funny thing is when I stopped letting go or when I started to let go of the outcome, better outcomes came to me naturally because I wasn't like so focused on me and everything that I cared about. So I thought that was an interesting, thing that happened.
Yeah, I was thinking about this too, for myself, like the ways in which when I'm not taking care of my mental health, like where that shows up, I guess, in my sales process. One of the things that I have always been good at is being hyper organized. I'm great with notes. I'm very meticulous with tasks. This is like every one-on-one for my entire career. This has been a theme that's come up. It's like I have my challenges, but this is like my thing. I'm like, you're going to see my notes. You're going to know what I'm working on. My calendar is my baby, all of that. And so what I've noticed is definitely the times in which I feel like I'm kind of falling off kilter, I'll see all of that organization start to turn to mess. Like the task list is usually my first cue. Like my task list gets backed up. I have like stuff that I would normally answer like in a couple hours that now it's stretching to a day or 2-day responses. That's usually when I know like, hey, I need to maybe take a minute or block out like a couple hours and just do an admin block and like catch back up. Because the problem is that if you just power through and you keep like working on other stuff, now you have like this backlog of stuff that you're dragging behind you. And it shows up, like Zoe said, in the way that I'm selling, because then I'm in a sales call, I'm trying to pitch, I'm normally feeling really confident, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, God, I have this slew of stuff that I need to do. And when did I need to send that email? When is that proposal due? And I'm not like present. I'm not there. I'm just like going through the motions. And so that for me, at least personally, is how a lot of this usually shows up, and usually a sign that I need to like take a minute and get organized again and get recalibrated. So I think for all of us in sales, like you don't have to be like, I'm a little bit of a notes freak over here, but I don't think you have to be that way. I think you can, but you should have some level of organization and some system in place, because it will help you long-term be able to kind of maintain and get through those harder periods as well.
Yeah, I kind of feel personally called out because literally while you were saying like the task back and you're thinking of other things, I was sitting here going, oh, I need to send that email once this webinar's done. So thank you for that. As far as would love to dive in a little bit from like the leadership aspect, how do you think you can work with your leadership if you are not one, or if you are in a leadership position, you have folks under you, how can you be more empathetic, sympathetic, all of those ethics to like in your role? Zoe, I feel like you'd be a great one to ask first.
So one super practical one, and I've been the recipient of this and I've now adopted it, is like, and Alexine and I'm curious to hear if you guys have done this too, but I separate pipeline and one-on-one meetings. Like, I don't want them to be the same call. I don't want them to be like, let's talk about like where your deal is, walk me through everything. Like, I want dedicated space, even if the separate one-on-one is every other week, like just dedicated space where it's like, how are you? How can I support you? Tell me about your life. Like, what do you need? And really kind of let the team run that meeting. And that's like a space for me to listen and just like see how I can support and block and tackle or just listen. I mean, sometimes they don't need anything from me other than just like, I'm just like really stressed out about this life thing or like whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I think too many leaders try and jam business updates into the one-on-one, and then you don't actually ever get to know about like what's going on in this person's life. What are their career aspirations? How do I help them be the best version of themselves? And we lose that like personal development. It just becomes this like project updates and task lists and like, okay, great. We finished 5 minutes early. Cool. Have 5 minutes back, instead of creating real space for people. So I think like as a leader, just like making sure people feel like they have space where there's no expectation. I don't need you to tell me anything about work. Like my friend Kyle Willis, I have a friend who used to work for him, and the friend was like, oh yeah, he always would say like, nope, don't talk about business during the one-on-one. Like, I just want to know how you're going to spend your commission check. Tell me about that. And like, what's the vacation you're going to go on next? What are you going to buy with that? Like, what does that mean for your life? And I respect that form of leadership and creating that space for people. So as a leader, just making sure people feel like they can bring those conversations. There's nothing worse than being somebody who's feeling like they're anxious or overwhelmed and then being afraid to talk to your manager about it. And I think the way that you make sure that people aren't afraid is that you are intentional about creating space for them to bring those things, whether they bring them or not. Just let them know it's available.
That's really great. Also, I actually have a story myself of recently with my current boss. You guys probably see him posted on LinkedIn, Gal Ager. It was our meeting, and I was on, there was a few things I had missed. This is sort of when, like, this is why I'm now diving down the mental health route personally. And before he dove in and was like, why haven't you done this? Like, why is this still waiting? Da, 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 da. He asked me one question. So like leaders, like this meant the world to me. He's like, Daniel, like before we get into all this, like he had sent me an email ahead of things of like stuff we had to go through. He's like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on in your life? And I basically was just like, and he scrapped the whole meeting, and we basically spent an hour of him like helping me. It literally went from probably a come to Jesus meeting to Daniel, like, hey, like this is how I've dealt with this in the past, and like for other, like being on the receiving end of that was huge. So like if any leaders are watching, like just ask. Would love to hear from both of my two A's here. And now, what about you guys?
Yeah, I think the story you just gave is like a perfect example of where I was going to say, as a leader, I think you need to look for the tells, which flows into what you and Zoe are talking about. Understanding like who the reps on your team are, what makes them tick, like how they usually communicate with you. I remember one of my favorite managers was one of my last managers, and he and I actually left the exact same time almost to go full time on our own businesses. So now we like talk about that, which is cool. But I remember like our first probably 3 one-on-ones in a row when I had started, and I was one of the first strategic AEs on his team. He just asked me questions about myself, and I was so cagey and weird. Like I was just like, what do you want to? I was like, I don't know. Like what? He's like, oh, what do you have going on this weekend? And I was like, well, let's just get to the pipeline, because I was so accustomed to that being the way that these interactions ran, and I had so many of these like poor experiences over the years, but I like had a shell built up. And so he would ask me these things. And then what was funny is we'd be, months out, and something would come up on Slack, or I'd close a deal or something, and he'd make a joke. He's like, oh yeah, that's like money for one of her upcoming cake classes. I'm like, oh my God, how do you remember that? And so it was just really cool to like have that and know that someone actually like knew parts of my life and cared about me, or like he used my husband's name, which I didn't even really think of at the time, but it was just like interesting. He knew like someone in my life's name. And so I think those things are really powerful. And on the other side of that, it made it really easy where if it was like a week where I was kind of quiet or not offering ideas, like he, then to check in, because he'd be like, listen, I'm used to you once a week coming up with some like wild idea for the sales team. I didn't get a wild idea this week. Like, are you good? And so I think that's the kind of thing, like, as you get to know your reps. And I honestly think that first couple weeks that someone's new at the organization, that is really the time to build that foundation. I think it's really hard to like try to build a relationship like 6 months in, because it's like, what are we doing? Like, we already like, we're like going on the date. We already got married. Now we're trying to date again. It's like we're going backwards. So I think it's really critical for at least that first period of time when you're starting with a company, for leaders to like spend that time, get to know you, understand what makes you tick, so they can start to identify and then be able to signal and understand what those tells are later on.
Yeah, that's great. Anthony, would love to ask you on a similar topic, but more of the angle of, this whole webinar is on avoiding seller burnout. Could you also like throw in some like, what are ways that you can recognize, if you're not doing so well, whether that is like what we're talking about, like if you recognize that in one of your team or even just yourself, like what are some tells?
Yeah. So, obviously I lead a team, and, the idea of burnout is real, and you could definitely tell. I joined 3 months ago, and I spent the first handful of one-on-ones just getting to know them, understanding, what were they doing on the weekend? And then Monday I would bring that up and ask them about it. Right. So it's not just like asking someone how they're, what they're doing in the weekend and just to ask them. It's like talking about it and really understanding like what they enjoy outside of work. And, you can anchor that on like, hey, I always like to ask them like, hey, how are you sleeping lately? Like, how's your relationship with your partner going? I know their names because I asked them about it. Hey, are you planning to do anything outside of work this weekend that's fun? Really trying to like get them to think about the importance of prioritizing themselves outside of work. And I think leaders set the tone, right? So I take PTO, so they know it's okay to take PTO. I tell them about my struggles with my mental health and my stories when I was a BDR, so that they can relate to it too, and know that when they talk to me, they can be their authentic, vulnerable self because I've showed up that way to them. And so for me, I recognize burnout by, energy over Zoom, tonality. And I don't just call it out. I just simply ask like, hey, how are you doing? Anything that's getting in your way that I can help with. And then I'll basically ask them without telling them like, hey, what are you going to be doing after work today? What are your plans this weekend? And so, yeah, that's like noticing my team. For me personally, when I start to get burnt out, my head starts to feel like a balloon. I start to get very like chippy with other people as well. And so I kind of like catch myself, like being short-tempered a little bit. I feel just my body like tense up. And I know for me, like that's time to like take a step back, get my steps in outside, call a friend, write how I'm feeling down, something, right? But when I feel burnt out, I feel it physically. I literally feel it in my body. And I lucky enough to have the awareness that that's what's going on and being able to step back and know that it's okay. Like, the world's going to go on if I take a step back, and that's all right.
Yeah. And one more quick thing I wanted to add to what Anthony was saying as well is that we're not going to like lose results by doing this. So like Anthony asking his team about like what's going on with them and like what they're doing this weekend, it's not like they're going to perform worse. If anything, they may potentially perform better because they're like, my manager cares about me. They actually understand what I'm into. You can also use this as a way to incentivize behavior. So like for me, how fun would that be? I do professional cake classes on the weekends. Like how fun would that be if one of my leaders is like, hey, if you make quota this month, like I got one of your cake classes, it's on me. Like I'm performing well. This is so funny, but my first really big spend when my first year in sales, I was like dying for a pair of like high heels, these high heeled shoes. And so we made that like my goal for the month. And it was like, hey, if you hit like this crazy quota number that no one's ever hit in a month, I'll get you your shoes. And I was like, okay. And I tripled that number that month. Like I went bananas. Like I was just like on the phone, closing deals, doing what I needed to do. And it was so much more fun for me because it was personal to me. It was like silly to other people because they're like, who cares about shoes? Like, why do you care? But I cared. And it was something. And then my leader recognized that. And so they reframed what we were focusing on so that it matched with that. And sometimes it's shoes. Sometimes it's a vacation with families. Sometimes it's a PTO day so you can have a day of rest. Whatever that is, I think when you do this work, like what Anthony was talking about, and really get to know your reps and what makes them tick, then you can actually incentivize these behaviors, which in turn drives more revenue, which is what we all want.
That's like a really interesting point, Alexine, too, that we should also touch on is like, not everybody wants to talk about their personal life at work too. So just like really, it's about meeting people where they're at, right? And like when you do know them and when you know what makes them tick, I've worked with people before who are like, my personal life is personal and I'm just like not really interested in sharing it. And that's totally fine. But I did learn from them that they're really, really motivated about money. And so I was like, okay, let's talk about like an accelerator or a spiff. So there's still ways to personalize your management style to your reps because everybody's individual. I think that's like one thing that a lot of leaders sort of like fall into the trap of they want to manage people the way that they like to be managed. And we all need different things. And so like, I love that, Alexine, where it's like, when you actually get to know your people, you know what motivates them, and then you can incentivize them appropriately. Because to your point, I wouldn't care about an extra day off, but yeah, if somebody bought me a pair of red bottom shoes, I'd be like pumped about that. I had a leader once who, it was like the worst month of the year. July is kind of hard and SaaS, and we were really behind. And he was like, if you hit this number, I know, because he saw it on my like goal board behind me on my like whiteboard that I had back in the day, that it was like, if you hit quota, like get a tattoo. He's like, if you hit quota, I'll pay for your tattoo. And I was like, okay, let's go. And so I actually missed it by like, I don't know. I missed the goal by like $150 or something like that. And he still did it because I was 3x the next closest rep on the team. And it was just like, that was so encouraging to me. And the next month I blew my number out of the water. It's like when you actually know your people, to your point, Alexine, like you know how to get them motivated, and it's going to be different from person to person.
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to double down on this too. I think oftentimes managers can they just give feedback to everyone in the same way, or they, have a one-on-one structure the same way for everyone. My favorite thing to do when I have a new rep on the team or when I met my team, I ask them how they like to get feedback. How do you like to be communicated with? Like, do you like Slack? Do you like talking in person, like over Zoom? Do you want me to check in on you during the week, or do you feel like that's too much, right? So like just being sure that you understand how they like to work and how they like to work with a manager is big. And then, because every rep's going to be different. And so being able to manage to personal preference and not your preference is something to definitely keep in mind. And ask that from your manager too. Like speak up and give that feedback. Like, hey, like I don't love like the Wednesday check-in on Slack. I'd rather just like do a quick huddle instead or something like that. So speak your needs too. And your manager's there to serve you at the end of the day.
That actually ties in really great too. My last question for you guys, I know, Jesus has flown by. we've got 5 minutes left before all of you wonderful people actually get back to your busy sales lives. What are some ways that people can ask for help? Like Zoe, I know this is something that's important to you. I'd love to start with you. Like if I am sitting here, I'm like, man, like I've just listened to the last 55 minutes of you guys talk, and I think I am like burning out and I'm at the end of my rope and I'm getting snippy with my partner. And like, what are some ways that people what's something that I can do like literally in the next 10 minutes that to like start this journey?
This is a good one. And this is also why I want to double down on like managers asking your people how they're doing, because it's really hard to raise your hand sometimes. And if somebody asks you, that's just like half a step less that they have to go, where you're opening up the door for them to say like, I'm having a hard time. Like Daniel, perfect example, that conversation that you and Gal had, like, had he not asked, you might not have said all of those things. You might have just had the originally planned, meeting, and that wouldn't have gone well. Like you may not have raised your hand, but if somebody isn't asking you, one thing that I've done before, and like I don't start with my managers. If I don't have that relationship, like I'm not going to start there. I actually start with my friends, and I'll just text somebody that I like, love and trust, and say, hey, I don't think I'm doing awesome. And then they immediately start asking me questions. Like if you just say like one sentence, like, I don't think I'm okay. Usually people that care about you will get curious and start saying like, okay, what do you need? How are you doing? And that opens up the conversation. It's really, really scary. Like I want to acknowledge how like it can like fill you with anxiety to tell somebody that you're having a hard time. But I've done that before. Also, this, I'm not recommending this necessarily, but usually if I send a friend a text that just says, hey, at 2 a.m, they know I'm not good. So when they wake up in the morning, they're like, are you okay? So that's another way to do it. But yeah, I would just like one quick sentence and be like, hey, I think I'm not doing okay. And I would bet you 9 times out of 10, somebody who cares about you will get curious and start asking you questions. And then you can start having that conversation. If you think it's bigger than that, if you think it's something where it's like, hey, maybe I need a professional, then if it were me, I would be like Googling therapists in my area and just maybe like in 2 or 3 sentences, describe what you're having a hard time with and say like, do you think you can help? That was always the subject line of that. And usually within a day, you'll have responses from various therapists being like, hey, do you want to hop on a discovery call essentially for 10 minutes? We can talk about it and you can see if there's a fit there. But I just start with like the not even saying like, hey, I need to talk, or like, hey, like you don't even have to ask. You just say that like, I don't think I'm doing okay. And I think most people will kind of approach you after that and be like, okay, why? Like, what do you need? How can I help?
That's awesome. Alexine or Ant, do you guys have anything to add before we call it quits?
Yeah, I feel like I guess I'll answer from the frame of mind of like people who are maybe more like introspective or don't feel comfortable maybe reaching out to people. I'm a big fan of kind of like I like to write things out. I like to like map it out. I like to like categorize things. I like to organize. So for me, often if I feel like I'm not in a good place, I like to kind of like figure out like what are these things that I'm like, whether it's like thoughts that are repeating or like themes that continue to come up, and like how do I kind of categorize and label those essentially and figure out like what are the themes. If I'm someone who maybe doesn't want to reach out to folks in my circle or maybe not be transparent with colleagues or managers for whatever reason, then I agree. I think a therapist is a great option where this is someone they're literally bound by law not to repeat. And I think there's like this underlying fear that you're going to tell them something and they're going to like, I don't know, like go meet with their friends and talk about it. But like they're dealing with like way heavier stuff most of the time. And they are licensed professionals. They do this every single day. And it is literally illegal for them to share what is going on with you with anyone else. So I think if I'm someone who doesn't feel comfortable, that's definitely a resource that I look into. Another thing I've done for a long time is reconfigure my social accounts. Are there people that are consistently making me feel like garbage? Whether it's that they're like posting, when we all know this, it's like fake. It's like too much like, hey, I'm in Milan today and I'm doing this. And it's just like, this makes me feel like crap. Like, I don't really want to see this anymore. So I think like reconfiguring and maybe like muting, if you don't want to unfollow people, mute some of those accounts until it's at a place where you feel like you can kind of let them back in. And also start to like add in, there are a lot of therapists now and licensed professionals who do post a lot of content on social. So I actually really love those where there's little snippets and videos that are really helpful, like one-off tactics and tips. It helps me. And so I think those are ways, if you're someone that doesn't feel comfortable reaching out to folks around you, to kind of do some, I guess, self-work in the meantime.
Amazing. Ant, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I know we're out of time, but very quickly, I think 2 very powerful words that have helped me are acceptance and courage. So accepting that whatever you want to address is true and that you need help is totally fine. It's okay to admit that you have a problem that you need to address. I think that's the first step in anything. And then having the courage to ask for help. or admit to someone else that you have this problem. You don't even have to ask for help. Just admit that you're having this problem to someone that you trust. That is an amazing first step. So to be able to admit to yourself that you have something wrong that's going on, whether it's in your head or relationship or addiction, whatever it is, accepting that to yourself and admitting it to someone else is a huge first step. From there, you're going to feel a weight lifted off your shoulders. Like you don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to keep this thing that's been bottled up in your head any longer, and you can start addressing it and taking action against it. So it's a small first step, but it's super powerful.
Thank you so much, all three of you. I love just getting a front row seat to it. I'm sure everyone else did as well. For anyone who is tuning in either late or who wants to go back and watch it again, you'll see up next to Zoe's wonderful head, there is a QR code. And if you scan that, it will take you to an aligned room. And inside of that is the recording. There will be some snippets we'll put in there as well, some like really key moments and of each of these wonderful people. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I can definitely say feel free to reach out to me. Even if you don't know me, I'll happily be a listening ear. I have way less followers than all of them, so like my inbox is way less cluttered. But thank you so much, and thank you all for giving us this time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.